Okay, we're back. We're live. I'm Jay Fidel. Here we are on Think Tech Asia with Pat Border, a regular visitor to Think Tech, who talks a lot about North Korea. Welcome to the show, Pat.
Thanks, Jay. It's always great to be here.
A citizen observer, a citizen diplomat, and a citizen kibitzer, I think, too.
I try for all of those things.
Yeah, you succeed.
Well, thank you.
So 2 months ago, you took a trip to North Korea, as you all want to do every year or so, maybe even more frequently than that.
It's been on average once a year, and I go to see something different each time. This time, I was invited to watch a military parade, and this to me was a breakthrough because I always wanted to see. We're always told by the diplomats that North Korea has a 1 million-man army, that it's poised right on the border, and it's ready to attack and annihilate and make a lake of fire out of the city of Seoul on very short notice.
Lake of Fire is a term of art.
Lake of Fire is a North Korean term of art, which their diplomats have often used when they want to describe the degree of destruction which they will mete out on the hapless South Koreans. Yeah. And so the question for any American citizen is, what is the actual quantum of the risk? Because, you know, we're paying for the security of South Korea just as they are. We have 24,000 soldiers in South Korea, another 48,000 in Japan, and they surrendered 70 years ago. So the question, you know, very quickly becomes, why are we paying for this and why are we doing it? And
well, did you ever think it might be about China?
I did, and in fact, I think you've hit upon something, because you know, at the end of World War II, our policy to bring down the Soviet Union, which was ultimately successful, was containment. The State Department, under people like Deputy Secretary George Kennan, said, let's contain the Soviet Union. So throughout the Cold War, no matter what direction they look, they're facing an enemy. And I think this same policy applies today, because I can't think of another reason why you would want to have almost 50,000 soldiers in Japan, a country that surrendered so long ago.
Well, could you make the case that those 50,000 soldiers, or make that 50 plus what's in South Korea, that's 75,000 soldiers.
It's almost 75,000 soldiers.
Are there legitimately, I mean, for a good cause, because of North Korea?
You could. It depends upon how seriously you take the threat of North Korea, and there are people who take it at face value. And that's part of the reason why I felt it was so important for me to get a look of my own at their best. These are the soldiers who are marching through Kim Il-sung Square and who are being reviewed by Kim Jong-un. So presumably, this is what they would call the cream of the crop.
Okay, we're going to see those photographs in a minute, but our program is North Korea. The Enigma continues, and AKA, should we take this at face value? Should we take these photographs at face value? What do we make of what's going on in North Korea? You already raised in the first 5 minutes of our program a credibility issue on behalf of Kim Jong-un. And so let's make our discussion. So what do we got in the photographs? Here we got some photographs you took
these
2
are
months
photos,
ago in North Korea.
These are photos of the parade after it comes out of the Kim Il-sung Square and as it proceeds down eastern Pyongyang. It crosses the bridge from the west and it proceeds down eastern Pyongyang, and these are the people who come out. It's really an obligation to come out and cheer on the soldiers.
Can I stop you there? What do you mean obligation? In other words, if I don't come out, am I going to be criticized? Am I going to be punished in some way?
It's unknown.
Command performance?
It's unknown. Actually, over the years, the discipline that's imposed by the party and by the government has diminished significantly. And that occurred during the time of Kim Jong-il. And it's unknown. It was just his personality was such that he cared less about rigid discipline than his father did. His father ruled for 40 years, and then Kim Jong-il came along. He had time to, because he was the designated heir, he had time to adjust and make North Korea his own creation, unlike the present ruler who was put into office so suddenly.
He
that
inherited everything.
Well,
Yeah.
he inherited the old regime, and he is responding with a reign of terror. Something like 70 people at the very top of the regime have been killed. And if you wanted to look for an example that was dramatic but accurate, recall in Godfather 1, just when the older Corleone is about to die, he's warning his son, if you meet with the heads of the other families, you'll be assassinated. So you have to take the initiative and act first. So what did Michael Corleone do? While he was having his nephew's christening, his surrogates were out knocking off the heads, whacking the top 5 family members. And that's exactly what's happening with the hierarchy now, because Kim Jong-un wants his own brand of North Korean rule to be effective. So he has shown absolute ruthlessness, killing his own uncle.
Yeah, we need to talk about that and put that in perspective with
Yeah.
the credibility question. But let's go back to the parade.
Okay.
Why did they invite you? What was their purpose? Let's assume they did this with some purpose in mind. Why?
Wasn't so much the North Korean government as it was the tour operators, who I know personally and have become good friends with, just because I've maintained an interest over the years. So when they have something like this come up and it's a one-of-a-kind situation, they don't have these parades more than once every several years. And so they take to the people who are their most favorite customers, and I was one of them.
But you weren't getting an inside view of weapons or strategies or the scope and strength of the military, were you?
What I have is a composite. I subscribe to a service, a news service called NK Pro, and through that I get a lot of information from all over the world that assesses the reality of the situation. One good example is the question of whether the missile shells that you're seeing, and I call them shells on purpose because they're empty, that are paraded through the streets. Is that really an active missile, even a Scud missile, or something that could be projected into outer space? The answer is no.
How do you know they're empty?
Because the people in the know, the people who are the most accurate commentators on us are telling us that. And this includes Russians who now live in Seoul, who were educated in Russia and in North Korea, and who now live in Seoul and are the academicians at places like Seoul National University, Kookmin University. One of these people, if I can just advertise for just a moment, is the author of the most authoritative book on the topic, and just a book that's, you can't put it down once you pick it up, and that is The Real North Korea by Andrei Lankov. Andrei Lankov now lives in Seoul and teaches at Kookmin University. He occasionally comes to Hawaii, and I hope to bring him at some point onto your program.
I hope you do.
Because he is trilingual. He speaks Korean, he speaks English and Russian, all three. And these are the people who've spent their whole lives analyzing North Korea. And the Russians have a unique perspective because they installed Kim Il-sung back in the late 1940s, but when Kim Il-sung achieved his control over North Korea and his unchallenged leadership, he kicked them out. So the Russians, in a sense, have been outsiders for the last 5
But
decades.
they're insiders now. They're teaching in the schools. This is pretty serious business. Somebody is saying it's okay for the Russians to be there. Why is it okay for the Russians to be there?
It's okay for the Russians to be in Seoul because they're, well, for one thing, it's a free society, and they do exchange ideas freely. So they found that by having a teaching position at these universities, they're free to write and to lecture on the topic of North Korea. These
They
people
criticize the leadership?
Oh, freely. In South Korea, you could criticize the
South
leadership.
Korea, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why there's no place for them in North Korea, because they're not free to comment upon the situation and the deteriorating situation. In some of my own earlier appearances, I think that I probably suggested that North Korea had some continued vitality. But as a result of my conversations, I spoke with Fyodor Tertitsky, who is another one of these highly educated Russians who have knowledge on this topic. As a result of my conversations with him, I conclude that North Korea is on its last legs. Here's the reason. We all remember when Mikhail Gorbachev came in the mid-'80s into the Soviet Union and said, we're going to modernize and reorganize, glasnost and perestroika. And these concepts were to modernize communism and make it more user-friendly to the individual. What he did was so radical that the whole regime fell. And that is the dilemma for the Koreans who rule in the North now. By trying to make changes and modernize and appeal to their own public, they end up deconstructing communism so that it no longer exists. And once that happens, then it falls. So the prediction of the brightest people on the topic of North Korea is that it will basically sag of its own weight, and whether the South Koreans like it or not.
But that's
Let me finish that thought.
Yeah.
Let me finish the thought, though. Whether the South Koreans like it or not, they will end up inheriting the northern half of the peninsula as the governing body. And right now, the Southerners are not particularly warm on the topic. As the new generation comes into adulthood, they see North Korea mostly as an abstraction, as if it were a country in Africa.
Let's go back to the question at hand, though.
Okay.
You have some analysts outside the country saying that North Korea is going to fall of its own weight.
Yes.
But there's no objective evidence of that, is there?
Jay, it's all predictive. And to be honest with you, the same
Predictive
people,
could be speculative.
the same people who predicted it have been wrong before. When the Clinton administration first offered to provide substitute energy in exchange for dismantling the nuclear sites, their feeling was, we'll only have to do this for a few years because North Korea will collapse. Now, that was while Kim Il-sung was still alive. Now, today, both of the first two dictators have died, and the present dictator has really no pedigree to speak of at all. And
Just within the four corners of our conversation, 70 people close to him have been killed in a preemptive pattern of assassination.
That's right.
Those are the people he doesn't trust. So
it's not, Jay, it's not even the people he doesn't trust. It's the older generation, and that's why they're in a decaying orbit. You see, when you take people who have traditionally run the country, but they're not running it the way the new dictator wants, he whacks them. And I use the term, I know it's a rather coarse term, but let me give you an example. Right at Christmas time, the chief negotiator with South Korea, a man named Kim Yang-gon, died. And the official explanation for his death around the Christmas time this past year, just weeks ago, is that he died in a motor vehicle accident in North Korea, which is a comical explanation. There's so little traffic in North Korea, and the traffic is pretty much travels on a straight line, that it's a real effort to create a motor vehicle accident, and particularly one that kills someone so close to a head of state. By December 29th, he was dead and gone, buried. Okay, now that official explanation is one that is very speculative in and of itself. He died, and of course,
I don't see any evidence there that that's falling on its own. But let's take a break, and you can come back and you can respond to that. The guy at my left, Pat Porter, and we're talking about North Korea because we talk about North Korea. And the question is, do we take it at face value? North Korea, a continuing enigma here on Think Tech Asia. We'll be right back. You'll see.
Aloha! Hello, my name is Patrick Bratton. I'm host at Global Connections here at Think Tech Hawaii. We broadcast live every Thursday at 1 p.m. We bring Hawaii to the world and the world to Hawaii, talking about international events and various things of interest to the audience. Please join me. I look forward to talking with you and having you get to meet some of my guests. Aloha.
Hi, I'm your host on Think Tech Asia, Bill Sharp. I look forward to you joining us each Monday between 4 and 5 o'clock when we film right here in our studio in downtown Honolulu. The show, Think Tech Asia, focuses on contemporary events in Asia. And by Asia, we mean anything from Hawaii, south to Australia and New Zealand, west to Pakistan, and as far north as the Russian Far East. Clearly, this is one of the most economically dynamic centers of the world, and we bring you up to date on what's going on in a whole host of countries in this very vital region. We look forward to seeing you. Aloha.
Wow. Okay, Pat, I don't know if you've noticed, but we have a monitor in the studio here, and it's dedicated to Twitter. And we get little tweets from time to time, and we have a tweet about this show from Roger Moore. M-O-R-E. And he says, considering Kim's messages about the H-bomb and that they tend to be internal propaganda, why do we talk about North Korea like they're a threat as opposed to a laugh?
That is a very good question. The only thing that I would say that's a slight variation on it is it's not really just internal propaganda. When they exploded, whatever they exploded, the night before last is basically when it happened, seismologists from all across the country immediately concluded
In the world.
All across the world is what I meant, yeah, is that this was strictly propaganda, that it was not enough of a blast to constitute an H-bomb blast, a hydrogen bomb blast. The reason that that's important to the North Koreans to leave that impression is that a hydrogen bomb is much more powerful than an atomic bomb, and it's definitely a propaganda effort, and it should be seen pretty much the way you see it, as more blather from North Korea. In other words, they never tell the truth.
Well, this reminds me of the photoshopped photographs of missiles taking off. This is maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, where you had missiles taking off, and the experts on Photoshop looked at it, and they found that the number of missiles were painted in, or, oh yeah, I remember, with the trajectory of the missile showed it going up, where in fact some of them had crashed on launch. Anyway, I mean, it's hard to be totally sure, but what you get is a big question mark about whether he's just full of it. And so let's assume for this discussion, Pat,
all right,
that he's not telling the truth. Propaganda is a kind word for that. He's just giving us a line here, giving all of us internally, externally, he's giving us a line.
Very
now,
much.
Does this mean that he is weak? Can you help me with that logic?
Okay, the way they're working now is this. As I mentioned to you before, they're not really capable of glasnost or perestroika, because if they change things enough, the whole regime will fall. So they're stuck with the model that they had originally, which is this rigid juche, self-reliance, we don't care what happens in the rest of the world. They're stuck with that model. The problem that
they're still faithful to the model. They haven't given up in the smallest way.
They are quite faithful to the model when you view it at 30,000 feet. But the problem is Kim Jong-un, the present leader, is so young that he never lived under his grandfather's regime. So he doesn't have the sense of how much discipline is required to keep the machine working. And he's modern. He's shown, he's got a cool looking wife, and he shows up at some sites that show that he wants to be seen as popular with the average person. And once you start doing things like that, when you don't have your ducks lined up, and they're not dealing with people with that same level of discipline, you've got problems because they're in a decaying orbit. What's happening is the degree of discipline necessary to maintain the initial regime is subsiding. It subsided during Kim Jong-il's time because Kim Jong-il was lazy, okay? And he was also so shy that he never spoke publicly. I had the opportunity during this last trip to Seoul which was in November, a month after the North Korea trip, to speak with the defector. And what was interesting about this lady was that she had defected from Najin, which was a city way north in North Korea, so it wasn't much of a travel. And to this day, she's still able to speak by telephone with her relatives, and her relatives say that she is not listed as a defector, she's listed as missing. Okay? Now, there are now over 25,000 missing North Koreans who live in Seoul under pseudonyms and government sponsorship in Free Korea.
It's been going on a long time, though, hasn't it?
It's been going on for a long time, but a lot of these people are just like this lady who was young, living under an assumed name, and presumed to be, what does it mean to be missing? How can a person just go missing?
Well, it's another credibility problem.
It is a credibility problem.
Because they're denying the reality. But, do you think that the U.S., or for that matter, any Western country, has good intelligence on what's going on in the inner sanctum of Pyongyang?
I do not. I don't believe that you can look from a satellite from 300 miles above the Earth and determine much more than, you can figure out if they've got a military base, you can figure out if they've got these Yodak camps that are the political camps for prisons for people who defy the regime. But much more than that, you can't get a feel for it. That's one of the things.
After the Sony experience, or I guess in the middle of the Sony experience, it seemed like the U.S. could shut the lights out in Pyongyang and do all kinds of things with their utilities and all that. And I had the impression, from the media, of course, that means that the U.S. had an advantage. They had the ability to hack the North Koreans, which was actually more profound than the ability of the North Koreans to hack Sony. So query, do we have intelligence by way of hacking?
I can't answer that. I think we're capable of hacking 10 times over from what North Korea could do to us. You brought up a topic that I'd like to address just for a second, because I think it's vitally important. A year ago at Christmas time, we had this movie that for a moment was not aired, and then it came out on YouTube, and then they said, oh, to heck with it, we'll just show the movie to everybody. And it was considered to be a parody, or I guess you'd say it's a takeoff on Kim Jong-un. And his appearance is ridiculed widely, but if you understand why he appears the way he does for his internal audience, it makes perfect sense, and it's very calculated. Kim Jong-un has an uncanny appearance similar to his grandfather at the same stage of his life, because Kim Il-sung was elevated when he was in his late 20s and early 30s to dictator by the Russians. So, to an average North Korean, the appearance of Kim Jong-un, far from being ridiculous, conjures up images of the original Kim, and it enhances his credibility. Now, he hedges his bet a little bit, so sometimes when he goes out to the provinces to lecture people on how to run the military or agriculture or you name it, since he's an expert on every topic,
I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, what he will do is he'll wear a parka, which is similar to the winter parka that his father used. So he's using images to conjure up both his grandfather and his father, but that seemingly ridiculous haircut is remarkably similar to what Kim Il-sung was wearing in the 1940s, and that's very much on purpose to establish some appeal on his part. These people know what they're doing. They're hemmed in. They're hemmed in by their own politics.
That works on my point. My point is that he's got the country under control, that he's killed 70 people who might be his adversaries, that he knows how to do internal propaganda, that he's made them like him. And there's a tradition of 3 generations now of people liking that family. It's not going to end anytime soon. And let me add one. I want to throw one more in the pot for you to consider. Okay. China likes the situation the way it is right now.
Okay, you're absolutely right on that. Mao Zedong in the 1950s during the Korean War intervened in part because he did not want to have American soldiers on his border. And so when Douglas MacArthur brought U.S. soldiers up on Thanksgiving 1950, right up to the Yalu River, that was his response. It was reflexive. And he didn't like being in the war, and he got weary of it very quickly because his own eldest son died in a bombing raid by Australians. But still, that is an operative fact. The Chinese want North Korea to survive in its debilitated state because it's a buffer against U.S. troops.
Right.
It's as simple as that.
Right.
So,
Would they go in? Would they go in? Would the Chinese go in to defend North Korea?
No, that answer is emphatic. What you would see, and I think what you saw even from the still photos, is that the North Koreans have aged tanks and troop carriers. And most, if you saw the video, you would see that most of the troops were high school kids who were brought in on the back of flatbed trucks. My message to you is this. North Korea has just enough in the way of physical force to prevent an invasion. It's too much trouble. This is a perfect photo, if that's on screen right now. These two youngsters, that's their million-man army. Okay, it's a bunch of lovable kids. You wouldn't want to hurt them in a million years, but that's the cannon fodder. Above about 150,000 serious soldiers, those youngsters are the North Korean million-man army. And that's why I conclude from what I see that the risk to South Korea is very minimal, if any.
Why is this? Why are these kids in the army? Doesn't Kim Jong-un have the opportunity to bring, able-bodied adult members of the army in from the population? Doesn't he have the control to do that?
He doesn't have the money to do it.
They work for less? What about the child labor laws, Pat?
Well, thank you very much. You're making my argument for me. They don't have child labor laws, and that's exactly why you see these delightful young children who you feel like giving them a big hug and a kiss and sending them off to school. But the reality is they are a kind of civil air patrol limited to the ground. They do on various projects. You can see them running about with shovels and the like to do.
But what's the dynamic on it? They've had a million-man. He's claimed they've had a million-man army for 5 years anyway.
Actually, we've claimed from our supposed insights and our intelligence that he has a million-man army. But see, here's where you come to the question.
Was it ever really a million-man army?
If you're asking me, my answer from visiting there 6 times and seeing a military parade is not so much no, pardon me, as hell no. They have about 150,000 soldiers who could put up a fight, and the rest of these poor youngsters, these babies, are cannon fodder. In other words, you run them at the enemy's guns, and they get plowed under.
It's been like this for as long as you've gone over there. And my point, see, it does support my point. My point is there's no evidence that the country is crumbling. And on that, I'm going to leave you to think for a moment more while we take another break. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
Hi, I'm Ethan Allen, host of Likeable Science on Think Tech Hawaii. Come join us every Friday at 2 p.m. when I interview interesting scientists about what they do, why they do it, and why we should all care about it. It's a lot of fun to see. And you can learn interesting stuff. You'll hear all kinds of fascinating science, and we know you'll have a great time. Hope to see you then. Bye-bye.
Hi, my name's Hillary Weinberg. I'm the host of The Whole Gamut on Think Tech Hawaii. See us live every Tuesday at 1 p.m. or on our YouTube channel to hear us talk about world affairs from Hawaii and beyond. See you then.
Aloha, I'm Carlos Juarez, host of Global Connections, and I want to invite you to come join us. We cover a range of global issues. We bring a lot of expert opinion, a lot of issues, whether they're contemporary events happening in the world or maybe looking at things from a more historical perspective. Global issues, very important for us to understand in this globally interconnected world. Join us here on Global Connections.
Okay, we're back with Pat Porter. We're trying to excite him, and it's working. So, Pat.
Jay is not a real skeptic. He's just egging me on, and he's doing a very good job of it. Okay,
So
that's the reality
this young
of this.
man in the tour program comes to you and says, Mr. Porter, could I please have your business card? And you give him your business card. Why did he ask, and why did you give him the card?
I think that's the $64 question, and I want to get paid before I leave. Because the tour guide, Mr. Lee, very urbane sort of fellow, speaks perfect English, went through our tour on the military tour, and for the first time of all the tour guides I've had, he asked me for my business card. Now, we don't have any phone service between North Korea and the U.S. We don't have any mail service between the two countries, so it's an interesting question. Does he perceive that the end is so close that he might need an ally in a foreign country to become a refugee?
I knew we'd find something.
Yep.
That he asked you for your business card is clear evidence that the country is falling down on itself.
Not only that, but
He's looking for a way out.
And you know full well that I'm not a very popular person among my cohorts here in Hawaii. So for somebody to ask me for a business card,
That
means
is something.
They have to be pretty desperate, wouldn't you say?
Well, either that or he was going to turn you into the secret police.
You know,
Now you're going to go back anyway?
whenever I go through customs, they ask me where I've been, and I tell them I've been to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and they yawn and stamp my passport and welcome me back to the USA. I have never had even the slightest question as to why I would go there, and I've always gone with people who are successful tour operators. One of the things I would say that I think is an interesting sidelight and that shows the decaying orbit is that during this trip, our desire was to photograph, just as you can see here, to photograph the parade. And when they let us out of the bus in East Pyongyang, they just basically said, come back after a while and we'll meet at such and such a point where the bus is located. I started walking away, and as you can see from this photo, crowds gather, and you always want to move a little bit further down the line. And by the time I was finished and started photographing, I suddenly realized that completely alone, unescorted by British or North Koreans, I was several blocks away from my group. And nobody said anything. In fact, at one point, I had this very funny experience because I looked down all of a sudden away from the activity that you see, and I saw this young North Korean, about 12 years old, looked at me, and he was startled because he realized I was a foreigner and they didn't see many. And I looked at him and I said, hello. And he said, hello. And then it's just as if nothing had happened. We went about our business. But as I walked away about 20 minutes later, I felt a tap on my shoulder, looked down, and he said, goodbye. And those are the little experiences that tell you that there's life on planet North Korea.
You've always found life on planet North Korea. You like the place. You like the people. You like the vitality they have. And I think, you probably enjoy the fact that they're alive under the mantle of this dictatorship. And you have touched that. It's really a thrilling thing. But does it mean the dictatorship is going to collapse?
I've been wrong before, and whole administrations, both Clinton and Bush, have been wrong before. So when will that collapse occur? I don't know. It'll occur when they get to that tipping point where they simply cannot run the country anymore unless they tap into their own private resources. And at that point, I think the lure of neutral countries like Austria and Switzerland and places like that
That's where we went to
will
school,
overtake them.
Yeah.
And I'll go this far. I think that Kim Jong-un will live a long life, but I think his older years will be lived in Switzerland, where he knows German and English and likes French food a whole heck of a
probably
lot better
won't be
than kimchi.
assassinated.
I don't think so.
You don't think he'll be
so.
assassinated?
I think the failure will be with a little bit of help from people power, like you saw in the Philippines in 1986, where people simply, they put down everything and said, we're not in the program anymore. The same thing happened in South Korea after the Olympic Games in 1989, when 1.5 million people came out to the city center and told No Tae-woo, the general president there at the time, don't you think it's time to retire? And very shortly after that, he said, you know, I think it's time to retire. And when the same thing happens in North Korea, people will be getting out while the getting is good. There's about 1,500 people.
You've studied this. You have studied regime change. I remember you comparing this to, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the fall of the Soviet Union, for that matter.
Yes.
And so you find comparison, between all of these regime changes in the last, 30, 40 years, and somehow it's going to happen in North Korea. But what I'd like to point out to you is at one time, Pat, you came to this table and you talked about reunification. You talked about a denouement between the very same Kim Jong-un and the rest of the world, that he was going to make peace and be sweet with flowers to everybody. You've changed your mind.
Mea culpa. You've caught me. You caught me more than once, and you caught me at that point. The whole theory of North Korea's operation is to alternate between confrontation and conciliation, because they create a confrontation, they create what appears to the uninitiated rest of the world as significant risk of war, and then in exchange for returning to the status quo, they extract concessions, and they've been successful. George Bush identified North Korea, and I'm not entirely sure that I agree with him, but he identified North Korea as being one of the countries of axis of evil. He said that in one of his State of the Union addresses. I'm not sure that he's right about that, but the point is, Clinton got sucker punched into giving aid in exchange for status quo. Bush got sucker punched for the same reason, and it was because in both men's eyes, they felt that the end was so near that it was the simplest way to deal with the problem, okay? And so if I succumb to the same thing, then, what does it say? Fool me twice, shame on me.
Well, at first we called it North Korea, the enigmatic, the enigma continues. Then we called it, this is, shall we take it at face value? And now I think I'm going to change it one more time. The end game is elusive. We don't know how close we are to any end game, right?
You are so good at making titles, I just don't know what to say. But you're right.
You never were at a loss before, Pat.
No. What I would say is this. North Korea will cease to exist during my lifetime, but I'm taking my vitamins and keeping my insurance in force. So it's going to happen, but earlier efforts on people's parts to determine when it would happen have been failures. So all I can do is fail again or be incredibly lucky.
Okay. On your next trip, what are you going to be looking for?
I have, on the last trip number 5, before this one, we had a lawyer's tour, and the effort on the part of that was to get attorneys involved and to just simply develop an acquaintanceship with our North Korean counterparts, because I feel very strongly that at some point when the regime fails, or perhaps even while it's in existence, there'll be opportunities to strike deals, commercial deals, and I don't see why, business lawyer Jay Fidel shouldn't have the edge over some guy in Houston or even Los Angeles, because you know more about the topic just from our discussions than your typical person does. In fact, I'm getting requests from as far away as New York City from people who want to participate in future lawyers' tours. So
And you're getting tweets from Roger Moore too. That is something.
that is.
But let me offer you this thought. if you were Kim Jong-un at this point, and make yourself rational, for that. In other words, I mean, I don't really think he's rational, but assume he's rational for this kind of analysis. Wouldn't you try to reopen, or open, I shouldn't say reopen, open North Korea for commerce, for deals, for people to come in, and sell them Western culture and develop their country?
No, he's falling into it by accident, and smart people have done it before. And the perfect example is Mikhail Gorbachev. Margaret Thatcher said in 1985, this is a man we can do business with, and she was right. He did himself right out of business. So that on Christmas Day, in 1992, on Christmas Day, he handed over the keys to the Kremlin over to Boris Yeltsin, because the Soviet Union as an entity, the collection of all those people's republics, ceased to exist. And it was a going out of business sale, and he never saw that. And that's the same thing that I think will happen to Kim Jong-un. I think he's smart. I think there's a method to his madness, and I believe that he's making changes by killing off all these people a la Michael Corleone, one after another. He's killing off continuity in Korea so that, the elders, maybe they're condescending to him, but they can also say, look, boss, the reason we always did it this way is because, if we created an emergency and then dealt with conciliation, we got free concessions, we got free food. And it works every time.
Keep stirring the pot.
These guys are suckers. It works every time. Now, he probably knows that anyway, but what I would say that I think is so instructive on it is that he's slowly diluting his country to the point where it isn't the same thing. Perfect example is the fact that they're letting Pat Border and other people of dangerous ilk in their country. As soon as they see me and they know I don't want to kill them and I leave them nice tips at the end of my stay, they realize that the bar was set so low for me that it's not difficult for me to get over. I give them a couple chocolate bars, a couple packs of cigarettes, and I'm their pal. And they don't see me the way that Kim Il-sung portrayed me. I'm portrayed under official North Korean dogma as a baby killer.
So Pat, one last question and we'll have to close, but if Kim Jong-un saw this video and heard our discussion here today, would he like you better or worse?
I think he would probably hold on to me for longer in one of their cells for tourists. Whether that means he likes me or dislikes me, I don't know. But they'd send me back within a few months. I'm not worth their trouble.
That's Pat Porter, a wonderful guest here on Think Tech Asia in Review. And we're talking about North Korea with him. He is a citizen, diplomat, observer, and often a kibitzer. Thank you so much, Pat.
Thanks very much. I really love appearing here, and I hope you'll have me back again.
Absolutely.
On any topic. I don't have to know anything about it, just any topic.